Welcome to Come to Your Senses, the School of Sensual Living podcast. I'm your host, Mary Lofgren. Here, we explore how to live bravely and beautifully through pleasure, mindfulness, embodiment, femininity, beauty, art, and of course, everyday sensuality. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. So in today's episode, I am thrilled to introduce you to my good friend, a really wise, impactful woman, Isabel Foxen. So a few weeks ago, or even months ago, I released a podcast episode called Things I Learned from Losing 20 Pounds. And in the episode, I shared about my own experience of the evolving nature of recovering from an eating disorder and having had an experience around weight loss over the summer that felt inspiring and empowering and different than how I had approached it before. And I received a lot of different feedback, and some of it was a critique that by centering weight loss, instead of just focusing on health and lifestyle changes for the sake of health and lifestyle, I was helping to contribute to the conflation of health and weight. And one of those critiques came from Isabel in a comment on Instagram. And so I asked Isabel if she would have a conversation with me about it on the podcast. And that is the conversation that you will hear today. I learned a lot from this conversation. I'm continuing to learn from it. And I hope that you find the wisdom and the resources shared here helpful and valuable. Enjoy. Hi, Iz.
Hey, how are you, Mary?
I'm great. I love how we're starting like we haven't been catching up for almost an hour already.
I know. Hey guys, yeah, we have been doing this for a minute now.
So we were just talking about our intentions for just having this conversation, and I want to just start by saying how grateful I am, just for your friendship, and I'm just grateful for your willingness to have a conversation and to help me see areas, where as a human being on this path of, I don't know, do we say recovery from eating disorder? Is that still the thing to say?
But I go back and forth on that personally. But yes, lately I have been using the word recovery. So I'm fine with that word as of right now. As of this moment, I am fine with that word. Who knows how I'll feel in 5 years? Yeah.
Totally. And I think that really speaks to just kind of the nature of this conversation is just the ever evolving process.
Yes.
So we were just talking about intentions, and would you like to share your intentions for this time?
Yeah. Well, so as I was saying earlier, I feel like my intention and it's funny because I think my intentions are really pertinent for this conversation that we want to have today, but also the truth is I hope that this is my intention in all of my conversations with clients, with, quote, media, right, forever, which is just really having understanding and having empathy for as many different kind of perspectives on life, health, food, body as possibly there could be, while also really being intentional about sharing a perspective that's really important to me and that's really important and I think protective and valuable for a lot of people whose lives really depend on, some of the information that I'm going to be hopefully sharing today. So in a way that kind of resonates and touches people in a way that people can hear. Something that we've talked about is, some of the stuff we're going to be talking about today is sort of almost politically, can even be politically divisive or contentious or triggers people or all of this stuff. And we live in a world right now where I think we really need to be, understanding each other and rather than like fighting and arguing. And that's just something I've been thinking a lot about is like, how do I communicate in a way that fosters connection and understanding rather than creates divisiveness, especially when you're talking about hot topics or triggering topics.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And I would say that my intentions are similar in the sense that I was talking to my partner before this conversation just about what I wanted to to get out of it. And just this, so I'll explain a little bit about this in the intro, but just, to kind of bring us up to speed is that I shared a podcast recently called Things I Learned from Losing 20 Pounds. And the podcast content was really kind of me sharing my own experience about kind of trying to find the middle path when it comes to having only had experiences of either obsessing about or swearing off the diet and fitness industry.
Mm-hmm.
And just that, and so when I published the podcast, I used a intentionally provocative title that really centered weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason I did it was because I wanted to reach a segment of followers that are not my regular followers, who might be pursuing weight loss and who might want to hear about an experience of trying to find the middle path rather than just chasing this kind of golden ticket. And so I got lots of feedback and some of it was critical. And so, and some people were super triggered and, sent some just really intense communications about their triggers. And I wanted to just kind of experiment with actually having communication around it instead of just kind of, blowing back about my intentions in creating the podcast or whatever,
Right. And instead of getting into the like defensiveness vortex is what I would call it, right?
Yeah.
Where people are like, well, you shouldn't have said that because of and then you're like, but I wasn't trying to be blah, 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 and it just like it goes back and forth forever. And I find that in social media in particular, that it's like it's so rife for that kind of communication. And it's amazing because I remember, I had made a comment on your post and I remember immediately after posting it, feeling this, remorse and this regret of like, oh shit, did I just enter into the what's going to be a defensive-ness vortex with like my good friend,
totally.
who I care about, and like, how do I handle this? Because of course, also I could, and as this is why you brought me on. I have a lot of empathy and really, a lot of understanding of the folks who were triggered by that title and by the content. And so in this particular instance, I was like, okay, I'm going to get involved. I felt compelled to get involved in it. And I remember dropping a comment on, I guess, your Instagram post where you were promoting this, and immediately, and I, I'm glad that it landed so well with you. I did my best to really try to be as, how can I share a new perspective with you without triggering that defensiveness and, really foster a conversation. But I remember feeling so nervous. And I remember having for lack of a better word, like a disagreement. I don't even know if it is a disagreement, but more just sharing a perspective, right? Felt so nervous about it. And then after I said it, I immediately regretted it. And I think that I was so glad you called me because I think that I didn't even go back and see if you responded. I remember I didn't even go on Instagram for like a week after that because I was so nervous about how you were going to take it. Yeah. Like,
and isn't that so funny? And like, that's another, I know for both of us, like an intention in having this conversation is just to, like, I don't want to say model. I don't know if model is the right word, but just to kind of model what happens when this stuff happens on the internet and how there's just no room for healing until there's an actual conversation,
Yes. It's complex because on the one hand, I also feel a lot of empathy for folks who come forth with their trigger, and come forth with, their anger, and I feel like I can't blame, right? Somebody, especially who may be in a position where they are, dealing with oppression. There's a part of me that's like, I respect that sometimes folks can't deliver information in this perfect, non-angry package. And also it doesn't, that particular way of communicating doesn't get people very far 99% of the time in terms of actually making a change.
Totally.
And so that's hard too, like.
Totally. Yeah. And I totally agree with you. And I think that, just to acknowledge, like, if I didn't expect that, I wasn't really, actually, I wasn't really fully expecting that kind of a response from this particular episode, but that's just kind of the risk you take when you put yourself on the internet, you know?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I have
Um,
been in that position before. It's usually the ones that you don't expect,
right.
right? Like,
Totally.
the ones where you kind of expect it, by definition, you were probably a little bit more mindful and careful about it. It's the
Hmm.
ones where you had a complete blind spot and you just didn't even think about it that are always the ones where it's like, oh, damn,
Yeah.
like I just like triggered some people and I didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'd love to just kind of talk about like the primary piece of feedback that I got was the conflation of weight and health.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
totally agree with that. And I understand that. And, like I said, like wrote this in my comment to you, like I was triggered by the title, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
part of the content of the podcast and my intent is, as someone who is in eating disorder recovery for the last decade or so of my life, weight
Yeah.
loss has felt like such a dirty word. And
Mm.
and I also just want to say before we start is that if there's
Yeah.
like, I want to set a personal intention that if there's a question that I have or
Hmm.
something that I'm about to say that feels ignorant or naive, that's the thing I have to say. You know what I mean? Like, I think
Yeah.
that's so important in these conversations is that we not try to kick a pile of dirt over our own ignorance. And so, and
Yeah.
I
Show
know
it
that
to me. And
this
then
is,
maybe we can have a conversation about it,
yeah,
like, like
exactly.
I want you to bring it to me. And this is how I run my coaching programs. Bring me your truth, bring me what's real. And then if I notice something that is a space where something could be healed or something, a perspective shift might be useful, my intention is to compassionately and kindly show that to you.
Mm-hmm,
How
mm-hmm.
does that sound as a deal?
Yeah, totally
Okay,
down.
cool.
Thank you.
Okay, cool.
So, so yeah, so for the past decade or so, like what I talked about in the podcast is that after 20 or so years of having a really dysfunctional, obsessive relationship with weight and food and dieting and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
I had a lot of personal growth and changes, and I
Yeah.
adopted an attitude of body positivity that I now realize in many ways was me basically just swearing off and completely switching gears from everything I had ever known.
Uh-huh.
And one of my favorite quotes from, I think it's Pia Melody, says like the opposite of dysfunctional behavior is often just more dysfunctional behavior.
Uh-huh.
So in other words, my approach to health and tending to my body and all of that
Yep.
became very riddled with my own anger at my obsession
Yeah.
with weight and diet.
Yep.
And so, if somebody would talk to me about like their weight or their diet they were on, I would be like, are you insane? Like, what is even wrong with you? You know what I mean? Like, it
Uh-huh.
just became such a dirty word to me.
Yep. Yep.
And then this summer, I just kind of realized how that attitude in myself, and I'm not saying that in any way that is what body positivity is at all.
Right, right,
But
right, right.
that attitude in myself was actually keeping me from having an experience of sanity, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So this is what I'm hearing is like there was a time when you were, really obsessed with dieting, weight loss, and as a result, right, your relationship with nutrition and self-care was really wrapped up in weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like many, right, you got fed up with that was not working for you, and you basically, had what I call like the fuck-ets, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right, where you're like, fuck it, I don't, I am going to just let go and not give a shit about anything related to food, nutrition, like physical self-care, blah blah blah, like fuck it. And I will say, just to validate that, it is common in early recovery for sometimes folks to need that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
long term, right, body positivity is not about the absence of self-care, and I want to get really clear about what the definition of that is in a moment. But it is really common, I think, when your relationship with nutrition and self-care is tied up with weight and usually therefore tied up with your self-esteem, a lot of times people do need like a full-on break, in early recovery, where they're like, I can't even, just like, don't even talk to me about a food. Like, don't even talk to me about, self-care, like these like physical self-care. Like, I just need to be able to eat, not think about this at all. Right. That's a common thing that I think sometimes people healthfully need to after a period of just being so obsessed with food as a result of being obsessed with weight loss and fitness. You with me so far?
Yeah.
That being said, the opposite of dieting from a health at every size perspective, right, which is sort of the body positive approach to health, is not the absence of caring about health or nutrition. It's the separation of health and nutrition from weight loss as a goal. And starting to develop a relationship with health and nutrition that is centered in what I would call actual weight neutral self-care, right? It's no longer about trying to make my body, the square peg of my body, fit into the round hole of, the shape that society is dictating for me. It's now about wanting to actually take care of this living human animal that I am. And really focusing on, what behaviors being an operative word here, what health behaviors and self-care behaviors, make me feel physically well and nourish me and make me feel good and, serve my sweet, tender little body, right? Or big body, as the case may be, right? Serve my living human animal organ. And whatever shape, whatever size she wants to be when I'm taking loving, tender care of her is whatever shape and size she wants to be, right? She gets to decide what shape and size she wants to be. My job is to serve her lovingly and tenderly and nourishing her and taking care of her the way that I would take care of my young child. So the opposite of dieting is not, this is the problem with diet culture, is that most people who are in diet culture, which is pretty much all of us at one point or another, right? I mean, that's the cultural paradigm, associate nutrition and self-care with weight loss and weight control so much that we don't even know the difference. That we don't even know the difference. It's like, our entire relationship with nutrition and taking care of ourselves is so wrapped up with being thin and trying to control our weight that in our minds, if there's no distinction between trying to lose weight and like eating vegetables, there's no, do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, if I'm eating vegetables, I must be doing it to try to lose weight. If I'm balancing my blood sugar, which I think we're going to end up talking about, because I want to get into some of the medical stuff if you don't mind, if you're open to talking about it, I want to get into that because I think it's really an important part of the story that you previously shared with me and an important part of the story for so many people. But, if I'm trying to balance my blood sugar, right, like I must be doing it for weight. Like there's such an, intricate link between the two culturally that people don't even know the difference. People think if I'm either, trying to lose weight, it's like the opposite of being obsessed with weight loss is not the opposite of having no respect for health. We're trying to just separate these things out entirely and being like, the opposite of being obsessed with weight loss is acting in a weight neutral way. And what does it mean? What does it mean to pursue health and pursue nutrition and pursue self-care in a weight neutral way? As opposed to, does that make sense? It's like the polarization that you're talking about, most people, and this is not just you, because of the culture we live in, which these things are so intricately tied up, we think that these two poles are, that to be healthy and diet, or to be unhealthy and not diet. And the body positive movement is trying to actually separate these two and be like, to diet or not diet is a completely separate question, right? And when I say diet, I want to just define what I'm talking about. I'm saying specifically the pursuit of weight loss, right? to pursue weight loss or not pursue weight loss, those are two, sides of the, sides of the spectrum. Could be to pursue weight loss or to operate in a weight neutral way. But we're trying to detangle that from good nutrition and self-care, right? Like, so if I, have health reasons for why I want to balance my blood sugar, for instance, which is a big one, right? Because this is a big one where, first of all, we just live in a culture where there's, like chronic illness related to blood sugar is a common thing. But also we live in a world where right now we have a medical system that's very, very tied up in, managing your blood sugar and weight loss being the same thing, right? I mean, right. This is just the cultural way that we live, is that trying to lose weight and trying to manage your blood sugar are the same. Self-care and nutrition and, health, right? Actually taking care of my health, doing things like balancing my blood sugar, making sure I get enough fiber, moving my body on a regular basis, getting a good sleep, right? All these things that are, what I would consider like self-care from a physical health perspective. What does it mean to actually care about those things and pursue those things and be, invested in those things without it having to be about fitting my square peg of a body into the round hole that society dictates for me. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Thoughts?
Well, it occurs to me too, like, and that was something I talked about in the podcast, is that like so there's like so many things that I want to ask you. And so one of them is around weight and health. And that a few months ago, I received a diagnosis around my hormones, where I was told that weight loss can help improve this hormonal condition.
Yep.
And I was like, well, shit, Yep. And so when I started working with this fitness and nutrition company, it really wasn't with any sort of a goal to lose weight, again, because that felt like such a dirty intention. And those are my words,
right.
That was how it felt inside of me. But what my goal was to like stop eating like a college student, right.
For the purpose of helping you manage this. I mean, this is what I'm hearing, is that there was a medical diagnosis that sparked some of this.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Which is important, because you're not alone there. I mean, this is one of this is a major topic, major topic issue in the health at every size, body positivity movement is specifically talking about how this all works medically, right? Because we still we very much live in a medical paradigm where weight and health are the same. I mean, and that's increasing over time. This wasn't always the case. This is not historically just the way things are. There's been a lot of political and lots of different, various things that have happened, especially since like the late 80s, early 90s, that have really kind of made it such that weight has become like the proxy for health and the way that we operate toward the weight loss is often been prescribed. It's often prescribed for a whole slew of different kind of physical ailments. And there's some reason to believe that it's sort of lazy, right? As opposed to actually talking to people about their real health behaviors, right? Let's just like slap on weight loss. Let's just be like, lose weight, right? As opposed to being like, hey, let's talk about your blood sugar. Let's talk about, because doctors don't have enough time. I mean, there's so many reasons. I don't even want to blame doctors, because I feel like doctors, there's education that's, not working when it comes to doctors around these topics, but also just time. Like they don't have a lot of time. Like our health system is so crunched that it becomes, they're really heavily incentivized also by insurers. There's so many different complex reasons why doctors are incentivized to just be like, lose weight as sort of like a panacea for all of these different kind of chronic illnesses. The problem is that messaging is problematic for a lot of people, doesn't work for a lot of people, can create a lot of harm to a lot of people. And there are other ways to manage these things, right? I mean, the reason that they tell people to lose weight is largely because things that we do to try to lose weight, things like, reducing carbohydrates, for instance, are correlated with things like reduced blood sugar levels.
one thing that's really standing out to me is that so I was diagnosed with PCOS.
Yep.
And which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, which has a number of different symptoms. And what I'm hearing is that what may have been a more accurate way for my doctor to talk to me was to say, Mary, you have this condition, and it would really help if you were to stabilize your blood sugar and
That's right.
increase your fiber intake and
That's right.
have more movement. But because
right.
of the medicalization of weight, what she actually said was it would really help if you lost some weight.
You just nailed it. You
Uh-huh.
literally just like, I couldn't have said it better myself. You just like put me to shame with how perfectly you said that. Literally, like you should be being interviewed, because that's perfect. I mean, I could not have said it better. That is exactly right.
Okay. That makes so much sense to me. And
Yeah,
that was
okay.
one of my questions for you in preparing for this time is like, because it is undeniable that I feel amazing after making these shifts and changes in the way that I approach my health and self-care and lifestyle. And
Yep.
accompanying that has also been some relief of weight in my body. And so like I guess one of the questions is like, and this is one of those questions that I felt really nervous to ask because it seems kind of ignorant, but like, where do weight and like, is there a place where weight and health intersect?
So here's the thing about, I mean, it's a complicated question.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the thing about weight. It's hard. Everyone's weight set point is different.
I just want to say I'm burning with shame after asking.
Oh my God. Okay. Okay. No, these are good questions to ask. These are safe. This is a safe container to ask these questions.
Yeah.
And it's a really good question to ask, because I think a lot of people have this question, and it's actually a complicated question to answer from like a scientific perspective, because there's a lot of different things going on with that question. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that I want to say, and the reason why weight neutrality is important, right? And one of the reasons why we really focus on weight neutrality in the Health at Every Size movement, obviously, right, is that it gets complicated by the fact that, every single body has a different weight that it will land when it's engaging in, these, just general reasonable self-care. Right? Like general reasonable self-care has a different weight that it's going to land at than general reasonable self-care me, than general reasonable self-care someone else. Right. And so, it's, first of all, it's really hard to know like how much of you feeling better is because literally, like chemically, biologically, like your blood sugar is balanced and you are getting more endorphin. You know what I mean? Like it's hard 100%. To know how much do we really know is the feeling better, coming from the self-care versus the weight loss. It's also hard to pick apart how much of the feeling better of the weight loss is because my body moves better in a ableist world, right? In this world that's sort of designed for thinner bodies, my body now fits better into that paradigm, right? I mean, there's just so many different things that go into feeling better as, when I've lost weight. It's like, well, there's just so many different reasons why you might feel better, in quotes, when you've lost weight that just have to do with all of these other things that are related to weight, right? So it's like hard to parcel them out. Like how much of me feeling better, like I'll say for myself, regardless of my weight, I feel better, right? Like just physically, like feel even more confident, feel like just, I can't describe it. It's like a physiological like sexiness or something in my body when my blood sugar is balanced. Like, just straight up. When I'm working out on a regular basis, it's like, I feel better. And I will say, as a person who I still have, all of this like trauma and associations, we all do, right? Trauma and associations with having grown up in this fat phobic culture for so long and this diet culture for so long. In my head, it almost feels like I feel thin. Like that's, when people say like, I feel, in quotes, I feel fat, I feel thin. Thin
Mm-hmm.
and fat are not feelings. You can't feel thin or feel fat, right? They're not feelings. However, all the feelings, like when I have like my blood sugar is super like stable and I'm getting lots of vegetables and I'm like moving my body on a regular basis and I'm pumped up with endorphins and my muscles are activated and like I'm like like I
Mm-hmm.
feel there's something about that reminds me, like that's similar to the way that I for so long I associated that feeling with feeling thin. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Oh my God, totally. Well, when you
Yeah.
said that, I really kind of felt into my body as to what is that relief that I described. Like I thought it was really curious that I used the word relief when I
Me
talked
too. I
about the
picked up on
feeling of
that. I
having,
noticed that.
yeah,
I
having lost
noticed
weight.
that.
And what feels relieving is I don't feel as tired in my body. I feel less bloated and my muscles feel more engaged.
Right. And so it's like how much of that is actually about weight, which is just literally like, a metric number of what your body looks like, right? Like you could weigh something else and feel that way if you felt that way. I don't know if that makes sense. That might be a little
Mm-hmm.
bit weird, and here's the thing is different people, I think, feel the way that you're describing at different sizes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the punchline.
Yeah.
Is that the feeling that you're describing, different people feel that way at different sizes. Different people, when they're at their health best, when they're in their health prime, which by the way, I will say for the sake of argument, just to put this out there are all sorts of reasons why sometimes you're being in your health prime doesn't happen, right? I mean, like you go through a big stressor in your life, you might not be in your health prime in that
Mm-hmm.
moment, like health prime is not a given, it's not an obligation, none of it, right? But it feels really good when you're going through like a mode where you're in good shape. Like, damn, like that feels good. It turns me on. Like I
Mm-hmm.
literally like feel turned on when I'm in the house. It's a great feeling. But I really am aware of the fact that, when I'm in that mode, right, my body is going to be, whatever size it's going to be. Somebody else in that mode could be in a very, very different size. This is another thing that I think this problem with the medicalization of weight is that it assumes the whole concept of BMI assumes that we all have the same body type. And that
Right.
is just not true.
Right.
It's just not, it's just factually observably not true. Like you take 5 people and you give them the same diet, the same just like nutrition principles, they're going to end up at different sizes. They're going to end up different shapes, different sizes, whatever. That's really, I think, where weight neutrality becomes so important. It's about respecting size diversity and helping people recognize like you can be your healthiest self in quotes, which again, not an obligation, not something you have to be all the time, right? But you at your healthiest self is any number of weights.
Mm-hmm.
Does
Mm-hmm.
that make sense, sort
It
of?
totally does. It does. It really does.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
and also like when I'm curious to just kind of hear your thoughts about the intersection with weight obsession and the conflation of health and weight and the way that white supremacy, I'm
Yes.
imagining, is really kind of the engine behind all of that.
Yes, there's a lot of engines behind that. White supremacy is a big one. Sexism is obviously, and misogyny is obviously a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Ableism is a big one. I mean, it sort of depends how much do you want to like kind of come back to like one root of all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Classism is a big one. I mean, there's just a lot
Mm-hmm.
going on,
Yeah.
there's a lot going on. But yes, I think, there is Sabrina Strings, who wrote a really famous book, or I mean, at this point, I feel like she deservedly got, a lot of attention this year in the body positive movement. And I'm really happy about that because her work is really important. She wrote a book called Fearing the Black Body. Which, really talks about, some of the historical kind of reference points in which, white women were really encouraged to diet, as far back as sort of like, early colonial times, as a way of, further distinguishing, white bodies from black bodies, and black bodies were seen as, a little bit curvier, more voluptuous. And in order to kind of like further like basically just further the otherness between white bodies and black bodies, white women were encouraged to diet to kind of like exacerbate their slenderness relative to Black bodies. And this became sort of like a justification for the dehumanization of Black people, right? And of course, therefore, a rationalization for slavery. Right. So this is one historical reference point as to where we start to see thinness as a fashion movement, as a thinness as a trend, right? Or like the pursuit of weight loss as a trend, right? The pursuit of weight loss is, relatively speaking, in history, a pretty new concept, right? Like for most of history, it's been about putting weight on, keeping weight on.
Right.
Like, most of history, that has been the case. And so this is sort of, as far as I'm concerned, Sabrina String's work is the earliest reference point that I know of white women being encouraged to diet, or just people being encouraged to diet in general, outside of like maybe religious fasting type of stuff, but that wasn't ever weight related per se. That was, kind of more the moralization of food, which is also kind of like parallel sidebar kind of going on at different times historically, depending on politics. And, it's always policy. It's always government policy that's running the show, by the way, like, just so everyone's aware.
Right.
Like these trends do not just come out of nowhere. It's not like people just collectively are like, maybe we should start getting into thin bodies, like these are all top down political governmental decisions that like drive all of these trends. Another really good example that wasn't explicitly weight related, but that was a moralization of food example was, like during World War, I think it was World War II, it may have been World War I actually, there was a big campaign by the United States government to kind of convince people to save food, right? To like not eat as much and to be, eat as little basically as they could, so that they could send over as much food to, the troops in Europe, right? And that, to support the war effort, don't eat too much and send so that we have lots of food that we can send over to Europe. And basically that was a way of, not having to do the very politically unfavorable thing in the United States, which would be to ration food. If the government didn't basically convince people to eat less on their own volition, they'd have to use rations, right? And rations, don't get you elected, right? So, right. So instead of doing the politically unfavorable thing of rationing things like meat and beef and, all of these foods in the United States so that they could make sure to get food over to the troops in Europe during World War I, they created propaganda campaigns where they basically said that, eating too much was unpatriotic, effectively, right? And that to be a good patriot and to support the war effort, you want to eat as little as possible. And so this was just another example of like a campaign that happened where we start to see a shift in the moralization of food. And there's all sorts of, it's a fascinating history, right? There's all sorts of sort of stuff like this that you can pinpoint where you really start to see the evolution of diet culture and the evolution of fat phobia and the intersection between the two. Sometimes fat phobia is leading the charge, right? And then diet culture springs forth from that, right? For instance, okay, we really want to make sure that white bodies look different than Black bodies. So let's, kind of encourage the pursuit of thinness. Diet culture results from that. But then, for instance, with this World War, I think it was World War I can't remember. I want to say it was World War I. But for instance, in this particular instance, it wasn't sort of directly fat phobia. It was actually about, not being gluttonous and kind of moralizing, eating less. But as a result, fat bodies became villainized, right? It was like, oh, they must not be a patriot because clearly they eat a lot, right? So you see this, these kinds of historical reference points all the time. And I think sexism also plays a huge role in this. There's like no doubt that, the impacts of this on women are different than the impacts of men. Even when you go back to the colonial era and, talk about, encouraging white women, they weren't encouraging white men to diet. They were encouraging white women to diet, right? Because who gives a fuck if women are starving, like women aren't running the world. They can just sit all day and just be starving and it doesn't matter, So there's all of this, right? It's a big intersectional mush pile, basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's profound.
Yeah.
Really, really. It's really, really profound and just so, I think just speaks to, how layered this conversation is, and how much is happening, like the medicalization aspect, for example,
Mm-hmm.
when my doctor told me to lose weight, when
Mm-hmm.
really what they meant was a number of other factors.
Yeah.
Like just how, like who's pulling the puppet strings of that conversation.
So, right, which also brings me to, I would be remiss not to talk about capitalism
Hmm.
and, the diet industrial complex,
Yeah.
complex, which I think has really been running the show for the past 20 years, right? It's like you take fear and hate, right? And then you add money to that. Woof, man. You know what I mean? Like now it's a real shitstorm,
Yeah.
So, you have this situation. I mean, thinness has been, let's at least, I mean, and there's the types of bodies, if you want to talk about flappers versus like curvier women in the 50s, I mean, there's been some level of distinction and kind of what trendy bodies are. But for the most part, thinness has been, the popular, has been something has been popular for, let's call it the past 100 years. And has been sort of the popular body type, all based in these sort of top level down, policy decisions that are directing these trends, right? This is not just like coming from nowhere. This is all coming from all of this, the historical reference points that we've mentioned. Then you add like money to that, right? You add like, there's this thing that people want that biologically is very difficult to do. This is the other thing that we haven't talked about that's really important about this conversation is the truth of the matter is that most people don't like lose a bunch of weight and keep it off forever and like, yay, now it's all like good and happy and like joyful and free, right? Like that is not the scientific evidence, right? Like that is not what the data shows. Most people who pursue, weight loss will struggle with it for potentially forever, right? And be like on and off the diet merry-go-round for a long time. And so another reason I think to kind of focus on separating health and weight, right, is like when we focus on health, like we kind of, there's some aspects of that keep us from going down that merry-go-round yo-yo dieting path, right? And we can talk more about that if you want to, right? There's focusing on weight neutral health is much more sustainable. And there's a lot of data and evidence to support that in terms of just like long-term health outcomes. But yeah, so you take this thing that for most people doesn't work very well long-term, like most people are not, losing 100 pounds and keeping it off, or even losing 50 pounds and keeping it, right? Most people that's just not the reality of what's happening. It's actually quite rare that somebody loses a significant amount of weight and just like keeps it off forever. And the folks who, are doing that oftentimes are engaging in disordered eating behaviors, right? And really struggling with it in some way. So this is sort of like the perfect capitalist machine, right? It's like it's like these people are desperate to be thin. They're convinced that it's up to them, right? That it's just a matter of willpower.
Right.
We don't talk about the fact that biology plays a role here. We don't talk about the fact that things like hunger are very strong innate instincts, that overwhelm our conscious brains and overwhelm our conscious intentions for good reason. We don't talk about that, right? The diet industrial complex typically operates in this sort of like universe of belief that like you are in full control of how much and what you eat, when that's not really true. And so, it's sort of like these two things. You have a customer who is desperate to buy your product, right? They are desperate to lose weight. They think their lovability and their acceptability depends upon your product working. So they're fully bought in. I mean, right? They're committed to your product. And your product doesn't work that well long term, but it works temporarily, right? And so when it fails, the customer thinks it's their fault and they buy it again.
Right.
And this just goes on and on. I mean, it's like literally there's no better moneymaker than this. No better moneymaker than this. It is like a capitalist wet dream. And, and again, I think like a lot of this is just sort of spurred on by the fact that, most people do get the message that their lovability and their acceptability, especially if you are a woman or a female identified person, especially if that is the case, you get the message that your lovability is, sort of directly related to your weight. And, oh my God, how much money would you is there to throw at lovability and acceptability. I'm in like an infinite amount. I mean, like my whole bank account,
Totally.
Like give it to me.
And more, and put it on a credit card. Yeah.
Right? And put it on a credit card. Yeah. I will go into debt for my lovability and acceptability, And so this is like a real, like weight loss surgery, I believe. And I haven't fully verified this with data, but I have some, close friends who work in the medical industry who I believe that weight loss surgery is the number one most common surgery in the United States right now.
Wow.
Which is crazy. Like it's more common than like any surgery, so, there's just so much want for thinness because of this relationship with thinness and status in our culture. It's like, throw the money at it. And so, I think what ends up happening is that this gets worse. The more money there is to be made, it gets worse because you get into like the marketing sales hate vortex, right? Like where it's like, oh, they really want to be thin and they don't want to be fat. Let's like double down on telling them how bad fatness is and how good thinness is so that they buy even more. And it just like gets worse and worse and worse over time. And what's ultimately happened is that like the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industrial complex has figured this out, right? I mean, they are businesses. Right. Like healthcare business is a business. It is a business with investors, with shareholders, right? That is their bottom line. Their bottom line. And so if you can medicalize weight, I mean, obesity in quotes, which is a word that I don't like because it medicalizes weight, but obesity only became a disease in like the past 20 years. Not even. I mean, I think it was less than, I think it was even less than that. I think it was in the 2000s that technically obesity became a disease. Prior to that, it was never considered a disease. It became, they invented that it was a disease so that they could diagnose people with it and sell them weight loss products and insurance would cover it.
And can you talk a little bit about, like, I know a little bit about the way that our obsession with dieting and weight leads to like I just think about obesity diagnosis and I think the simplest way to ask the question is like how this obsession with weight loss actually furthers what some might call the disease of obesity. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. Does dieting cause weight gain? is I think really the question. And it's interesting. I think that the data is again really complicated with that. And so I don't know if anyone can make a really, really, really strong, like definitive argument about it because the data is very weird because you can't ethically do an experiment where you starve people and then refeed them and see what happens.
Right.
We actually do have one study. There was one study where they actually did do that with conscientious objectors in World War II, I believe. And they took a bunch of conscientious objectors and they actively, intentionally took a bunch of healthy people and put them on starvation diets, which, by the way, the calorie amounts for what is a starvation diet is like what Self Magazine is just calling normal. Like, I'm just like putting that out there. So so the data with the it was called the Minnesota Starvation Study. And basically what ended up happening was a lot of things we learned from that study. I mean, once people were allowed to eat what they wanted again, they basically binged their faces off. I mean, you can't even imagine like eating so much to the point of feeling sick, sometimes eating so much to the point where they would throw up. Right. And the binge, it wasn't just like one binge, it wasn't just like, I just got off the diet. I'm going to go have a good Friday night and then like eat normally tomorrow. Like they were binging until they gained the weight back and more. They kept binging they kept eating, what people will, and I don't even really like the word binge because it's like pathologizing. It's like, this was them weight restoring. It's actually a healthy, natural thing after a period of being starved, to like put the weight back on. Your body's like, get me the food back. Like you are making up for a deficit. That's what a binge is. That's how I define a binge. That's how I understand a binge now, which a little bit different than emotional eating, right? Sometimes those words are conflated. Sometimes people use those words interchangeably. I make a really strong distinction between, I'm sad, I want a cupcake, and I haven't eaten bread in 5 weeks and I'm going to eat all the bread right now, So, they basically like binged their faces off, right? They basically were just like eating super huge amounts of food, right? Just like getting it in until they weight restored, right? Until they basically got back to their original weights plus a little bit. And most people gained a little bit more than what they started with. And then most people over time actually did go back down a tiny bit. So like there's this thing called, there's this weight researcher woman that I like named Gwyneth Olwyn. She calls it fat overshoot, like weight restoration overshoot, where basically after you rebound off of a diet, it's really common to gain more weight for a period of time. But if you like actually just like commit to normal eating, like in a lot of instances, people will eventually go back down to their original weight, assuming that people are, assuming that this is, people's trajectory of this is mirroring what happened in the Minnesota starvation study. The issue with the Minnesota starvation study is that it was just one time. It was just like one bout of starvation and then like one weight restoration period. What happens when you starve people over and over and over and over and over and over again chronically for years and years and years, and they're going through the cycle over and over and over again? There's some theory that will cause metabolic damage, and that over time, your set point weight, if you want to call it that, right? The weight your body naturally lands at will change. But that is very hard to study. We don't actually have, there's a lot of theories about it. There's a lot of like discussion about metabolic damage from dieting, but we don't have any like hard research where we can study this and really see this in a really very controlled environment, because it would be totally unethical to conduct that experiment.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it also makes sense that, the natural instinctual response to an experience of perceived starvation by the body would be overcompensation.
Exactly. Yes. It's so like, duh, when you think about it, right? Yeah. Again, I think that the question really becomes, again, we've so made it. We have invented in this culture that, restriction diets are healthy. Like in Health at Every Size, another, if we want to talk more about not conflating health and nutrition, in Health at Every Size, having a super calorie restrictive diet would not be considered healthy, because it is almost certainly going to result in this rebound effect, right? Like this is sort of how it's just going to be a yo-yo cycle. Right. But thankfully, you don't actually need to be on caloric. There's a lot of ways to do things like balance your blood sugar that have nothing to do with restricting calories.
And so if someone wanted to just kind of begin their exploration into this separation and into a pursuit of health and self-care that isn't so interwoven with weight, do you have any suggestions for where they might start?
Yes, I have some wonderful suggestions. So, there's a very, very, very famous book about the Health at Every Size movement that is titled Health at Every Size, by Lindo Bacon is their name. But when they wrote the book previously, their name was Linda Bacon. They are an amazing, like awesome, just incredibly mind-blowing trans person that I have an incredible amount of respect for. And they wrote this book, called Health at Every Size. Health at Every Size was a movement, was a political movement that, had existed far before the advent of the book, is my understanding. But this book was written, was one of the things that came out of that movement. And it really, she is a very, talented, or they, are a very talented weight researcher who really chronicled, right, all of the different, kind of research and studies behind, kind of why the pursuit of weight loss often doesn't work for people, what the harms are that can come out of the pursuit of weight loss, and how we can start to, actually pursue things like blood sugar management, for instance, is like kind of the biggest one for most people, in weight neutral ways, right? Or it's certainly not just blood sugar, but that is a very common one, for obvious reasons. And so that's a great book. Health at Every Size is the title of the book, and it's a very, very famous book. There are things about the book at the end of the book that I would say are like, kind of maybe a little bit outdated or like not totally perfect, in terms of just like, I won't even get deeper into that. But for the most part, right, the research and the science behind it is just incredible. I mean, like, it's really just very well done, very important book. And it's sort of like it's sort of in the canon, I would say, of body, major body positive books out there. Like, it may be like number one in the canon. Intuitive eating is another one that's sort of complicated. Intuitive eating was not always weight neutral. I mean, intuitive eating is sort of an anti-diet, sort of the foundation of most anti-diet approaches to food. And the Health at Every Size movement certainly advocates for intuitive eating, but intuitive eating itself historically has had a lot of very weight-centric people in it. And so, intuitive eating, in my opinion, kind of answer some questions about, how to move away from things like calorie restricted diets and start to listen more to your hunger and fullness signals. But alone, I think intuitive eating is really incomplete without, really talking about health at every size and really talking about, some of the more specific health things that you can do to do things like balance blood sugar, right? Like, intuitive eating is not going to probably talk about that. It doesn't really talk about that. It doesn't really talk about, facing, medical conditions, and dealing with, what are weight neutral ways that are, the least kind of restrictive to my human body as possible. Because in general, humans don't love restrictions, but that make a big difference. So like a really good example of, something that you can do about blood sugar is like even just adding in things like protein, fiber, and fat help you balance your blood sugar. If you are really struggling with disordered eating and are really, really triggered by restriction, cutting things out or limiting things might be too overwhelming for you. You might just be in a place where like, the harm reductionist move for you is just to really focus on adding in the stuff that slows down the absorption of sugar into your blood, right? Adding in fiber, adding in protein, adding in fat, right? Rather than, an exclusive focus on reducing, simple carbohydrates. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of things. I wrote a blog that I really like. I mean, not to like toot my own horn, but like, I think it's a really, really good. Yeah. I wrote a blog post. If you go to Isabel Foxen Duke /health at every size, or just like Google Isabel Foxen Duke Health at Every Size. I think it's like the third post up on my website right now. It's a pretty comprehensive kind of like, I call it like a mega post that just explains, my personal understanding about health at every size. And I think it's pretty good. Like, if you want like a quickie, like internet download on health at every size, I think it's a good one. So, and probably a lot easier to read than the Health at Every Size book. Although maybe you start with the blog post, and if you want to go deeper, you can get the book. But the blog post is pretty like comprehensive for a blog post. And it really gets to the heart of what I consider to be like the major key points that people not even just need to understand about health at every size politically, but like understand about health at every size in terms of how it relates to them and their relationship with food. Right. And what does this mean for how I operate around food personally?
Awesome.
Yeah.
And the last question that I have is around like tending our triggers with this kind of stuff. Yeah. And not even so much as it relates to the people who got triggered by my titling of the episode, but like I remember a moment where I was doing this nutrition program. And part of the nutrition program is like you track your meals and you send it to your nutritionist, and she offers feedback or tweaks, or like if you have questions. Like I was eating a lot of beans or something and I was feeling really gassy, so I could like ask her how to prevent that, whatever. And one of the things she said was like, looks great today, Mary. Just lay off that chocolate or something like that.
Right.
And it took me like 2 hours to like process that with my mom, who I was staying with at the time. And every time I went to write back to her and say like, don't tell me not to eat chocolate, or it's my right to eat chocolate, or, like the defensiveness, I just kind of realized was my own trauma. And I was paying this person to help eat in a more balanced way. And she was essentially doing her job.
Yeah.
And so as we do, like, I imagine that even taking a health at every size approach, as we face with nutrition, those triggers are going to come up. And so do you have any thoughts about just kind of tending to yourself in this process?
I have a lot of thoughts about this particular thing that you experienced because, on the one hand, 100%, absolutely. Like one of the, you responded to that because you have a lot of diet cultural trauma, as pretty much all of us do. Right. And it drives me fucking crazy that a nutritionist wouldn't think about that. Do you know what I mean? Like that and this is why I'm starting to work with more professionals. And I think more professionals do need training, is like, come on now. It doesn't occur to you that maybe this person has trauma around that. Give me a break. You know, so I have mixed feelings about that particular example. I mean, if she wasn't a nutritionist, we'd be having a different conversation. But in this particular instance, I have to say it's like, and it's hard because, she does think she's just doing her job, right? Like she, and she probably thinks that you want a quote unquote accountability.
Right.
Because that is how, right?
Which, like, in full transparency, like, I didn't start this process wanting to lose weight. I started it wanting to just kind of make some lifestyle changes. But then once I started to really coast into this experience of fitness and nutrition, I was like, well, maybe I do want to like experiment with losing weight. I mean, it's been a decade and maybe I can orient to it differently. And so in that way, she was, you know what I mean? So anyway.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, right. I mean, so, exactly. I mean, this is the thing. There's, if you had said to her, right, like if you're like, I want to lose weight and I want the accountability, right, and then that's what their job is, right? But what's interesting is like you, in that situation, what is complicated is like there is trauma. If you had gone to her for weight neutral purposes, I just feel like people just need more training. I just feel like people, if people are going for medical nutrition therapy, like nutritionists just need more training around trauma. Like, and I think also it's just not that, it's so obvious. I think the issue also with nutritionists is that nutritionists are very generally speaking, they are a population of people who are very bought into fat phobia, right? The vast majority of people who are buying stuff from them are buying stuff from them for the purpose of weight loss. That is, 95% of their clientele, generally speaking. And the reason that people become nutritionists themselves is usually because they have a personal investment in weight loss, right? I mean, nutrition science is not that interesting. I mean, like, it's sort of, it's like kind of interesting, but like the vast majority of people who become nutritionists are people who have a probably borderline obsessive relationship with weight loss. I mean, I think I've heard statistics like 80-something% of nutritionists openly admit to either having had or currently having an eating disorder. Right. I mean, this is just like, it's an entire industry filled with folks who usually have some sort of eating disordered background. Not always, but the vast majority of them do. And so, very complex, very complex. Yeah. I mean, we could talk just about that one interaction all day and how it could have been different and what to be, right? Because it's like, on the one hand, you're asking for, this thing. On the other hand, maybe you weren't actually asking for it, but then maybe you got interested in it because they assume you're asking for it because everyone else is asking them for it. I mean, it's just like, it's the whole thing.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having this conversation with me, and not just for having this conversation, but having this conversation, publicly. And I'm so just grateful for you as a friend and also grateful for your voice in the world. And I appreciate you and I love you. And thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you so much. Yay. I loved this.
For coaching, classes, and community in the art of sensual living, head to schoolofsensualliving.com. There, you'll find a free video course in how to shed anxiety and embody your most confident self through the secrets of feminine body language. Head over to schoolofsensualliving.com/confidence for immediate access today.